Almighty Heavenly Father, Yahweh, this is Kohan Michael Hawkins. I ask and come before you, being seated of your last day's witness, Yisrayl Hawkins, and through your Son, Yeshua Messiah, the High Priest of your house, Father, asking and praying that you would continue to guide us and help us, Father, as we rehearse these words of our beloved past and overseer Yisrayl Hawkins. We ask and pray, Father, you continue to strengthen our minds and help us in our understanding and to realize the serious times that we're heading into, Father. We bless you. We thank you for all things you've given to us. We ask these things in unity of the body of priests, through your servant Israel, and through your beloved Son, Yeshua Messiah. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Please be seated, men. Oh, boy. Okay, let's see. We left off on page 261 here. Now, we are into, remember, this is the God's final attempt. Because it says the gods know that the time of the end is near, and so they're going to try everything that they possibly can to go full force to destroy mankind, to keep Yahweh's plan from taking place. And that's the thing, is that, you know, they're willing to destroy a whole planet just to fulfill that goal, including themselves even. They don't care, but, you know, they want to stop Yahweh's plan from taking place. Let's go here on top of page 261 here. Start off on the top of the paragraph there. It says, Yahweh's given the last days house of Yahweh the same faith that he set for the entire kingdom of priests. Okay, so it's the last days house. We have the same faith, Remember it says in Yada chapter 3, verse 3, that this is the faith was once and for all delivered into mankind, given to mankind, and that is what we contend for, is that one faith. So, if the house of Yahweh can be turned from the faith, then that would prove that all the other remnants would have to turn also. You know, if they were faced with this final test. And that's why Yahweh inspired the Apostle Shalom to write that if the last remnant doesn't succeed, neither can the previous remnants be trusted to remain true in the faith, or being in Yahweh's likeness. Therefore, the gods, of course, are attempting to influence mankind, or the house of Yahweh, to turn from righteousness during this final test. And that way they can prove to Yahweh, well, man's unfit, you know, for the kingdom of Yahweh. But remember what it says here on the other side of the page, here on page 260, in Romans 8, verse 38 and 39, it says, For I am convinced. Now remember, this is the same faith, okay, the very same faith, he says, as given to the last days house as any other era. So we have to contend for that faith. Now in Romans 8, he says, For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor Malachim, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other thing in all of creation will be able to separate us from the love of Yahweh, which is in Yeshua Messiah, our King. Meaning that no matter what goes on in life and what Satan will try to throw at us in all those various different areas there, nothing can separate us from Yahweh. Because Yahweh has given us that one faith, and if we'll stick to that faith, the same faith that Abraham had, then we will be able to become in his likeness and be made into his image. And that's what Pastor's trying to do with us in these last days, especially right now, trying to show us, okay? Let my people go. He's warning the entire world, just in the days of Pharaoh. Y'all understand all that? Okay? The word pope is the same as Pharaoh. Okay, and just like in the days of Moshe, when Moshe said, Yahweh commanded him, let my people go, that's exactly what's taking place today. Okay, it says, the gods have already proven themselves as being unfit, as they turn from being righteous Malachim to becoming angels of destruction, or gods. Hebrews 11, verse 39 through 40 says, And all these, having obtained a righteous report, remember there's a whole list in Hebrews chapter 11, going back to Abraham's time and so forth, and Abel and all the way through to Moshe and beyond, and the apostles and all of the prophets and stuff. And so he says, all of these having obtained a righteous report through the faith. Okay, there's only one faith. Remember, it tells us that. There's one faith, there's one hope, there's one baptism. But yet they haven't received the promise. Yahweh having provided some better thing for us, that they without would not be made perfect. You remember, the better thing for us, of course, is we are the last remnant. We are the ones who usher in the kingdom of Yahweh. It's our job to come to perfection. We owe it to Yahweh to come to perfection so that we can be ready. And there's many setbacks in Yahweh's house, that set us back. Right about the time that we think we're pretty much ready, then we find other things we have to work on. But Yahweh's given us this time to use it wisely, to be ready for this. And we're going to have, remember, the power of resurrection. To be able to resurrect the dead, okay? To heal the sick. Now, I don't know how many people really pay attention to ordinations or not, but when a priest is ordained, he's given those same authorities, the same power that Yeshua gave to his 12 disciples when he told them, go out, to raise the sick, raise the dead, heal the sick, and so forth, cast out unclean spirits. And through the history of the house of Yahweh, we have actually even seen these things take place and have done these things. So we know the power of Yahweh is real. We know he works through his house. We have cast out demons and stuff. And people have been healed. People, we have had, like Pastor said, we don't ask for these things and stuff, but people have been healed of AIDS and things like that before in Yahweh's house in the past. Okay, so it says, if we, the house of Yahweh, endure unto the end of the great tribulation without turning from that faith. We can't turn. We've got to remain faithful. And that's why he said, look, when you leave Egypt, don't go back into Egypt. Okay, remember, they went back into Egypt. But if we continue without turning from the faith, we will have proven that mankind truly can convert fully into Yahweh's likeness. Now that rests upon us, okay? We are the ones who are holding back the kingdom of Yahweh. We are the ones. We have to prove ourselves worthy that mankind can be fully converted and trusted. Because remember, when we resurrect the dead, all right, when we resurrect everybody else that's going to be living, we're going to be teaching them. We're going to bring them up to the point where we're at so that they can understand the things that have taken place throughout the time of mankind and get to the point to where we are today. So we will be worthy of becoming Yahweh's children at that time, his family, and we'll be trusted to rule as Father Yahweh rules righteously over the whole universe. Over the whole universe. If you got your scriptures, open up to Psalms 8. I want to read this. It's a beautiful psalm, and it tells you these things. We'll be ruling over the entire universe. In Psalms chapter 8, he says, how excellent is your great name in all the earth, Yahweh, our sovereign King. You have your glory firmly set above the starry frame. See, remember now, Yahweh talks about prophecy, and he's the only one, remember, who can foretell future events, can tell you what things can take place. That's why he knew the end from the beginning. But that's also why it says that, remember, in whom he has called, he will also glorify, right? Well, we are glorified in the fact that we are written in prophecy. And we will always be remembered as the last remnant, the ones who brought forth the completion of Yahweh's plan. That will always be an honor that we will hold throughout all eternity. So you firmly set you have your glory firmly set above the starry frame, okay, of all the universe that's out there. And from the mouths of babes and sucklings, strength by you is ordained. So you would still the enemy, the avenger would be crushed. Okay, and we are going to steal the enemy, because the enemy is not going to be able to, one day as it says, all the gods will be wiped out. When we consider your heaven, the work your fingers frame, the moon and the stars, which by you were ordained. Okay, remember, they were ordained. They're set in motion. There's beings that take care of all of these heavenly bodies that's out there, and they have to operate all in accordance with Yahweh's laws. What is man that you're mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? I mean, when you think about it, what is man that Yahweh would even be mindful of mankind? Because we're nothing in comparison to all of the magnificence of all of the other spiritual beings. And remember, there's different spiritual beings, okay? There's different offices and different types of spiritual beings and stuff that's out there. And he says, for you have made him a little lower than the Malachim, but yet you will crown him with glory and honor. You made man to be ruler over the works of your hands. No other being, okay? All the other beings that's out there in the universe are looking forward and waiting for the revealing of the sons of Yahweh, okay? They're waiting for us, little puny mankind. That's why Yahweh made everything. How many billions and trillions or whatever years, whatever number you could put on it, that he's been creating all of this stuff? Far in advance than before he made us. And yet, we're the reason why he made all of that. So we can share these things with him. You would put all things under his feet, the sheep and all oxen and all the beasts of the field, and all the fowls of the air and the fish of the sea, and anything that passes through the rivers under the sea. Now remember too, the gods, okay, what the gods do. He says, I made you rulership over the birds of the air, over the fish of the sea, over the creeping things and so forth. The gods always went after these types of creatures. And remember, they mimic themselves after these things. And just like the Egyptians. The Egyptians always worshiped gods that were part man and part animal of some sort. Either the falcon, the birds, the snakes, or whatever it was. They always mixed these types of animals together with mankind because of what Yahweh says here. Yahweh says all this stuff is going to be taken care of. And that's why he talks about against bestiality and so forth. Well, the Egyptians broke all of these laws. All of these things were abominable in Yahweh's eyes. And he even told the Israelites, remember, he says, don't do any of these things because all the nations before you have already done these things and become abominable. But notice, he says, how excellent is your great name in all the earth, Yahweh. Okay? He said, we're going to have power to resurrect all who have died before us. And we will be presented together as a chaste bride of Yeshua. Chaste bride of Yeshua. I want to read Yekeskef 37. Yekeskef 37 is talking about the resurrection. In Yekeskef 37 verse 1, he says, the hand of Yahweh was upon me, and he carried me out in the spirit of Yahweh. And he set me down in the midst of the valley, which were full of bones. And he caused me to pass by them all around. And behold, there were very many in the open valley, and lo, they were very dry. And then he said to me, Son of man, can these bones live? And I answered, O Father Yahweh, you know. And again he said to me, Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of Yahweh. Well, it's the same thing that Yeshua talked about, remember, in Yochanan chapter 8. Yet everyone who is in the grave will hear my voice and live. This is what Father Yahweh says to these bones. Behold, I will cause breath to enter into you, and you will live. I will lay sinew upon you, and bring flesh upon you, and cover your skin, and put breath in you, and you will live, and you will know that I am Yahweh. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a shaking, and the bones came together, bone upon bone. You ever take bones and rattle bones together? You ever hear that noise? Bone upon bone began to come together and assemble. And all the microbes at that time were putting these things back together, remember? And the incredibly amazing thing about it is, if you think about it, okay? Suppose someone was on a ship and they got in a shipwreck and they die, and they went, the ship went down to the bottom of the ocean. And then his body deteriorates, and that's scattered all over the place. Every way you can think of, it's scattered all over the ocean. thousands and thousands of miles. It's scattered everywhere. Who knows what different parts and then the animals will eat this and break it down even further to microscopic parts. And it's scattered all over the place. People who died thousands of years ago, you see like the archaeologists, like Jerusalem was covered up. How many different times was that place covered up, with layer after layer of dirt and so forth. And people have died in different areas and have been covered up, And then you had the flood that wiped out all of these people and stuff. So you have trillions and trillions of dead bodies all over the place that have been broken down to microscopic particles that the earth can use in the water and in the air and in the land. And yet, you're going to prophesy and say, go and get that person's DNA and bring it together and form the bones before your eyes. And the microbes are going to go and do this. They're going to search for thousands and hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of miles by the time it's all done with, and grab every little tiny microscopic piece of that person and bring it back to you and actually assemble it before your eyes. Now that's what he's talking about here in this chapter. That's the incredible power that Yahweh is referring to when he talks about the resurrection. He says, and then I looked, and then the sinews upon the flesh came. Okay, so there was bones, and then the sinews began to cover. And then the flesh. And from the flesh, he said, cover them over, and then but there was no breath in them. So now you had a body put together, but there's no breath. A body can't have life if it's not alive, right? And we know that. It's the life lives in the blood, but the blood is not the life. Now, if a human body loses all of its blood, it dies, but you can still have some blood in your body and die. So it's not the blood itself that actually gives you the life, right? It's what Yahweh gives as life. So here he puts these beings together, and there's a body completely formed, but there's no life in it. And then he said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, O Son of Man, and say to the breath, this is what Father Yahweh says. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe upon these slain, so they may live. And so I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came unto them, and they lived. And they stood upon their feet, an exceedingly vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried and our hope is lost, and we ourselves are completely cut off. Now, he's talking about Israel, which is all the ones whom Yahweh has dealt with, the whole earth, really. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what Father Yahweh says, behold, O my people, I will open your graves and cause you to come out of the graves and bring you into the land of Israel. And then you will know that I am Yahweh, when I have opened your grave, O my people, and brought you up from your grave. And that's when we're going to be teaching them, and then they will truly know and realize who Yahweh is. And then they'll understand the reason why. They'll have to be taught. Why did they have to go into captivity? Why did they have to go through all of these problems in Egypt and so forth? Why did they have to go through all of that? And they'll be taught these things. And he says, and I have put my spirit upon you, and you will live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you will know that I am Yahweh, has spoken and performed it, says Yahweh. So it's an absolutely incredible thing that Yahweh has in store, that we're actually going to be able to behold these things and see these things, because we will be doing these things. And that's what we got to keep in mind. This is for us. And it's only given if we will overcome. So he says they're going to have to, all right, when resurrection comes, then we're going to be brought forth as a chaste bride of Yeshua. In 2 Corinthians 4, verse 14, he says, knowing this, that he raised up Yeshua the King, he will also raise us up with Yeshua and will present us with you. Okay, and all things are for your sakes, and that by the unabounding mercies that is spreading through the many may cause thanksgiving to abound to the glory of Yahweh. Because of this, we do not faint. Even though our outward man may perish, the inward man is renewed day by day. So even though we suffer in the human bodies that we have, The inner man is being renewed day by day by day. So as the new man within us, the renewed person within us is being renewed itself, that is what will help through. That's actually what's going to replenish our bodies to make ourselves completely new again. For our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. And that's something that you got to tell yourself a lot nowadays. Every day is beneficial for us to be afflicted. Psalm 119, I remember what he says here. He says, the light and momentary afflictions. Boy, they don't seem light and they don't seem momentary at the times, do they? But when we suffer, it's for a reason. As it says in 119, verse 71, it was beneficial for us that we were afflicted so we might learn your statutes. There's a reason why Yahweh allows us to be afflicted. And in these last days, the affliction is great because, you can tell that we're reaching that time period. We're reaching that last state because the pains, the aches and the pains and the seriousness of the sufferings that Yahweh's people are going through, even life-threatening conditions and stuff, it's getting more and more serious, and the pain is increasing more and more. So we know that Satan is trying to wear us out mentally. But our light and momentary afflictions are achieving for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. So we do not look at things which are seen, but the things that are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which were not seen are eternal. And that's the way that Father Abraham looked at things. He didn't look at, you remember it says he looked for a city made without hands. He went out and Yahweh said, go, leave, and go out and do what I tell you to do. So he left, and where did he go? As soon as he left, remember where he went? He went to find the great teacher of Yahweh. And he went there to talk to the great teacher of Yahweh and to be taught of Yahweh's ways and to find out what Yahweh wanted him to do, how he was going to use him in this great and awesome work. But it was the same way. He didn't look at things that were seen. He looked at the things that were not seen, because the things that we see are temporary. They're not going to last forever, Go and buy something and see how long it lasts. Okay, things don't even last a time that it should. They break down before you know it, and you have to go buy something else. So nothing lasts there, But what does last is Yahweh's kingdom, and Yahweh's promised to give us eternal life, to be able to live forever. And think about it, when we enter into that kingdom, we're not going to have the aches and the pains that we have. You're not going to suffer forever. In fact, the scriptures tells you that everything will be taken completely away from you. You never have to suffer another headache. You never have to suffer a toothache. You never have to suffer any kind of pain at all. Everything will be completely wiped away from your body. You will only know complete joy. And that's how you can have complete joy and peace, is because your body will no longer, you won't have a dis-ease, right? A disease. Your body will no longer be not at ease, but it will be completely at ease. It will be at peace, and you will be able to really, truly enjoy life. Now look at page 262. It says, why the greatest tribulation and the next Holocaust? The gods failed in their attempt to destroy. Now it says, why the greatest tribulation and the next Holocaust? Why did Yahweh have to have tribulation? Remember what the scripture says? That through much tribulation, we must enter into the kingdom, right? You have to go through tribulation. You've got to go through tribulation because that's a testing point, Yahweh tests us to see what are we made out of. So we have to be tested. But this is the greatest time of all. No other people on the face of this earth have been tested the way that we're tested in these last days. And there has to be a Holocaust, which is consumption of fire. It's a sacrifice. Okay, it's a burning up. Now the gods failed in their attempt to destroy the ancestors of the two witnesses and prevent them from being born. You have to go back into history, and you can see the fact that Satan even started up a world war to try and make sure that she could try and wipe these people out so that the two witnesses would not be born. That's the amount of trouble that the gods went through to try to prevent this from taking place. And so it says here, so in one last attempt, they will try to turn the chosen of Yahweh in this last remnant in order to avert the plan of Yahweh. In order to keep the kingdom of priests from forming, they're going to try one last attempt. And that one last attempt is going to be to try and wipe out every human being on the planet Earth, so that no mankind will remain alive. And if no man remains alive, then no one could possibly fulfill this scripture. And that's what their attempt is try and keep prophecy from being fulfilled. Remember, that's Yahweh's glory. Yahweh's glory is that he can prophesy the future. He can tell what's going to take place. He's already said in the very beginning, remember in Genesis, he says, I made man in my image and in my likeness. And in Revelations, it says, in Romans, it says that Yahweh speaks as though things were already done, right? So he already gave us the plan. He already gave us the promise of what he intends to do. And then it says that because he's able to foretell, that's part of his glory, because no one else can do that. And so he said, I'm going to make them in my image and in my likeness. And so the gods have always tried to destroy mankind. And so the very last attempt that they're going to do is to try and wipe out the planet, because they already know the potential of man. Now, they haven't seen it, but they know the potential lies there, because they know the power of Yahweh. Remember, it says, and the demons know and they tremble. But they know the power of Yahweh. And so therefore, they know this is going to take place. They know this kingdom of priests will be formed. And of course, Yahweh knows their plans and has warned us in advance of what is to come. And notice this revelation here in Revelations 9, verse 11. And they had a king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, which means destruction. In the Greek language, it has the name of Apollyon, which means destroyer. So there's nothing righteous about these things, okay? They want to destroy mankind. And the sixth Malach sounded, in verse 13, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before Yahweh, saying to the sixth Malach, which has the trumpet, loose the four angels which are loose in the great river Euphrates. Now that's the four messengers, remember. And the four messengers were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, a day, a moon, and a year, in order to slay the third part of men. Now remember, that's where that comes into play, to where when you count back to that time, you see that this is set up exactly what Yahweh said. And Yahweh held it back, remember. Okay, Yahweh held it back. But he's not holding it back now, because it's fixing to start back up again. And the number of the army of the horsemen was 200,000, for I heard the number of them. And in my vision I saw the horses and those who sat upon them. And they had breastplates of fire. Verse 16, the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, I heard the number of them. Now, that 200,000 is not an actual number, okay, but it refers to two great armies. And those two great armies is the United States and Britain, okay? That's the two great armies that it's referring to here. And he says, in my vision I saw the horses as they were sat upon them, and they had breastplates of fire, which is red, and of jacinth, blue, and brimstone, which is yellow. And the heads of the horses were the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone out of their tongue. Now you got to remember, okay, what we see is symbolic, as it's written in here. Can you imagine? It would probably be like you, if Yahweh could take you and put you back, thousands of years ago. You look around and you'd be looking for stuff that you're used to now, and you couldn't find it. Well, how did the people survive? How did they cook their food? How did they do this? You wouldn't find a refrigerator. You wouldn't find a TV. You wouldn't find a radio. You wouldn't find a computer. You wouldn't find any of these things. You wouldn't find tall buildings and so forth. And so when the Apostle Yochanan wrote these things down, whatever came to his mind is what he used to be able to describe these things. That's why he talked about the skyscrapers as being mountains. To him, it looked like mountains. Well, he talks about these horsemen here. In fact, this starts off at Revelation 9, 11, but I want to back up just a few verses there. In Revelation 9, verse 3, it says, and there came out, well, first of all, it starts off and he says, he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, and the smoke of a great furnace, okay? And the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Now, we know that the suns will be darkened and so forth, right? And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and to them were given as scorpions of the earth have power. Locusts, okay? Remember that, locusts. And then I think it's in verse 7. Yeah, verse 7 says, and the shapes of the locusts were similar to horses prepared for battle. And on their heads, as it were, crowns of gold, and their faces like the faces of men. Now, these shapes of these locusts, okay, were similar to horses and prepared in battle. What he's talking about there is really talking about the noise that is made, okay? When you think about, they use horsemen, okay? Remember, not too long ago. And when the horses would travel, okay, you remember like the old Western days and stuff, when the horses would travel and you'd hear the clopping of their hoofs hitting the ground and stirring up the dust, and you had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of horses all running at the same time. In fact, the prophets made mention of it was like the sound of the horses of leaping from mountain to mountain. I think the prophet Yisrayl says that. Okay? And that's the sound of these locusts that he hears, he says. And he says the shape of them was similar to horses prepared for battle. So you know what? They're going to war. Okay? And notice it says they had faces like the faces of men. And they had the teeth of lion, which means they were war machinery. And they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings, these locusts, the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots and many horses running to battle. And they were similar to scorpions. They had tails similar to scorpions, and with their had stings in their tails, and power to hurt men 5 months. Okay? This is something I kept throughout the years because it always astounded me, because when I looked at this, I always saw a locust. And this thing ain't working, is it? See the locust? Mm-hmm. Does that not look like a locust? I mean, you've got the eyes and stuff, and like it says, the sound of its wings, referring to the choppers as they chop back and forth, the exact same type of sound that he would have heard as the horses prepared in battle. And then the smaller one on the side there, But it's truly amazing because of the fact of the war machine that they saw these things. I often thought of, too, about when it talks about it describes and it says the tails are like a serpent. It always made me think about the stealth bomber, because the stealth bomber is shaped that way, where it's kind of like a serpent wiggling against on the ground someplace. So he goes on here and he talks about these great armies. Now, so he talks about the colors, and then he goes into verse 18, Revelations 9:18. And by these three were the third part of men killed by the fire, by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. Now, another thing, these things too, boy, I mean, this is a Apache helicopter, and these things, you don't fool around. I mean, that thing right there could wipe out a city in just a few minutes with the amount of firepower that it has on it, because this is all missiles that it's got here on both sides, and there's missiles lined up in here, plus there's machine guns on here that would just... It would completely blow everything away. One of these things could wipe out Abilene, with the amount of firepower that they can have carrying them. Now, then it goes on and it says, they had power in their mouth and in their tails, for in their tails were similar to serpents, And they had heads with them, which they hurt. Of course, the heads were the missiles and stuff that would fire off from those. And then, of course, like it says, they were similar to serpents, and they had heads, and with them they do hurt. Of course, there's multiple warheads that they strike with as well. But it says that the rest of the men were not killed by these plagues. They still did not repent from the works of their hands. And here's the interesting part, that they should not worship demons and gods. Demons and gods, okay? And remember, it's the demons and the gods that are actually inspiring these people to go to war to begin with. They play with the people's minds, okay? And then inspire, just like, you go back to the time of the dinosaurs, where we know that they made the dinosaurs, and as Pastor explained those things about how that they would influence and have war games with these things, okay? And so they do the same thing with mankind with war. They love war. They love destruction. And notice, he says that they should not worship the gods and the demons, okay, made of gold and silver and brass and wood, okay, and stone, notice, and of wood, which can neither see nor hear nor talk. Now, the interesting thing about this is that every one of these ingredients, okay, is used in making nuclear weapons, or weapons in general, okay. You have gold and silver, which is used in the electronics, okay, very high conductive of electricity. And they use gold in atomic bombs and making them and so forth. And brass and stone, okay. Now you might think, stone, why would they be using stone? There's certain things known as gemstones. You ever hear of a quartz? Quartz is usually a clear gemstone that we think of. But what a quartz is used for is for oscillators, okay. They'll slice it very thin, and they use it in electronic circuits, because what an oscillator does is it makes a certain frequency. And sure, you've heard of frequency before, okay? The formula is 1 over T, or 1 over time, according to how many, 60 hertz according to the lights flashing and so forth. But this is how computers run off of. When you think about, it's a 3.7 gigahertz computer, okay? Well, that operates off of crystals. It operates off of the oscillators that are made with crystals. So these things are used, these stones are actually used in the circuitry that is used for war that they're talking about here. But they can neither see nor walk, A computer can't do anything, okay? Computers are really dumb. You know why they're dumb? They're dumb because they can't do anything unless you tell them to do it. Okay? Plain fact. Turn a computer on, what's it going to do? It'll just sit there. It ain't going to do nothing until you punch something in there and you program it to do something. It can't do anything on its own. Okay, they try and work on artificial intelligence, but that's really faking when they do that. But so they can't walk on their own. They can't do any of these things on their own. There's no life form there. It's not like a human being. There is no life. Neither did they repent of their murderers. And notice, this is what they use all of this stuff for, is to murder people. Nor of their sorceries, because what do? You've got to have death and sickness, right? Which all wars bring about death and sickness. So that you can make money on your pharmaceuticals. So you can go in and get people deathly sick, or kill people and so forth, so that you can come back through another means with your company and sell them pharmaceutical drugs and make money off of it. That's what's in their sick minds. That's the way that they live. Now you notice these colors. It said in verse 17, there was the colors of fire, which is red, and japheth, blue, and brimstone, which is yellow. And you see here this was first appeared in the mark of the beast. Remember that picture there of the nuclear bomb? And you can see the blue, the red, and the yellow. Okay, so that's the colors, the three colors that make up that nuclear explosion. Now, it should be easy to see, too, in these verses, like it talks about these angels, these gods, like 2 Thessalonians 4:4 shows that they have blinded the hearts and the minds of the people. They're leading these kings. They're leading these political and religious leaders and the inhabitants of the earth, of course, into this great tribulation. Now, Revelation 16, 12 through 16 says, And the sixth Malach poured out his bowl upon the great river Euphrates, and the water was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. Of course, they're preparing for war. And then it says in verse 13, And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. You ever think a demon or some spirit could look like a frog? The Egyptians knew that. That's why they worshiped Heka, which was the goddess, another fertility goddess, who had a woman's body and a frog's head. But they were the spirits of demons, who perform signs and go forth to the kings of the whole inhabited earth, to gather them to battle for the great day of Yahweh. Okay? Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments. Okay? Or he will walk naked, and you will see his shame. So we have to remember that we have to remain covered with those holy garments, or Yahweh will not see us as being holy. Remember what it says in Psalm 110, that Yahweh will see his people. They will be arrayed in holy garments and encompass the earth. And he gathered them together into a place that is in the Hebrew tongue called Armageddon, or Armageddon as everybody refers to it. Now these unclean spirits, okay, that they're spoken of here in verse 13, these are spirit beings, or the creatures, the gods, and they perform certain tasks, and they use humans in the same way, just as humans use dogs and horses and different animals and stuff like that to perform certain tasks on earth. Well, these unclean spirits, they have a certain power over mankind, and they influence mankind. As it says here, they can actually enter a person's body to influence a person's thoughts and actions. And we see examples of that in the scriptures. Even Yeshua confronted people who were possessed with evil spirits. And I know sometimes people come to Yahweh's house and they ask, am I possessed? Do I have an evil spirit bothering me? I'm going through all kinds of trouble and stuff, But no, when a person comes to Yahweh's house and when someone repents, those things are taken, removed. The only way that someone had in years past, we did cast them out and they came right back in. Just exactly like Yeshua said, that if you allow them back in, they will become even worse. And they did. We've seen, increase greatly. But they can't stand this place. So we don't have to worry about that, We keep Yahweh's laws and they can't stand that. They stay far away. The only way they can do is trying to influence the world to come against us, Now we're tempted in various ways and we have to give in, we may give in to temptation. But we don't have to worry about demon possession because they can't possess what belongs to Yahweh. Remember that. Now the scriptures show that Yeshua and the 12 apostles cast out these unclean spirits out of many people. And we plainly see in Revelation 16:13 that the gods, these angels, or these malachim that had fallen, are using these unclean spirits in these last days to influence and to lead the kings of the east to get ready for this battle. Okay, this great battle that's going to take place. Now, Yeshua spoke about this great tribulation in Matthew 24, verses 9 through 14. He said, Then they will hand them over to be afflicted, and they will kill you, and you will be hated above all peoples for my name's sake. And we've seen this take place. A lot of people have lost their lives throughout the history of man. And then there will be many will be offended and fall away, and will betray one another and hate one another. I'm beginning to see more and more about this falling away and the deceiving of the very elect. And many false prophets will rise and will deceive the many. People can be deceived. But it's a choice. It's a choice we make. We choose to be deceived. We choose to be righteous. It's always a choice. No one can make you do anything. And because iniquity, that is the breaking of Yahweh's law, the pushing it away will abound, then the love of many will grow cold. Because if you push Yahweh's laws away, then you have nothing to hold you together. You have nothing to guide you and lead you into love, what Yahweh's love is. But he who endures unto the end, the same will be saved. You got to endure until the end, though. The end, the very end of it all. When Yahweh's plan will be completed completely, then that is when we will receive our rewards. And the message of the kingdom will be preached to all the world by the witness, to all nations, and then the end will come. Now notice, verse 10 shows us that many will fall away from the house of Yahweh. And praise Yahweh, but not all, but many will. Verse 11 shows that many false prophets will arise and deceive many to turn away from Yahweh and submit to the gods. Okay, breaking the laws of Yahweh as the world sees everything being done today before our very eyes. You know, you look around, it's there. But these false prophets, like the kings of the earth, they're influenced by these demonic spirits, and they're sent out by the gods. And that's what it says in 1 Yachanai 4 verse 1, Beloved, do not believe every spirit. Notice what it says, don't believe every spirit. What does Christianity do? They believe every lying spirit because they don't know. They have no understanding of what truth is. They have no truth. So therefore, all they can believe is lies. And they believe in the spirit of Christmas. They believe in the spirit of Easter. They believe in the spirit of New Year's. They believe in the spirit of Thanksgiving. All of these different spirits that are out there influencing their minds, they believe and they gladly accept. But Yahweh says, don't believe every spirit, but test them. Test the spirits. And that's one way, too, that we were able to test people whether to find out whether they had spirits or not, and whether the spirit was there of Yahweh or not. To see whether they are of Yahweh, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. Okay? Verses 13 and 14 show us even a more joyful prophecy. It says here, but he who endures unto the end, the same will be saved. And the message of the kingdom will be preached into all the world by the witness. And we have a part of that. That's where we're at right now. We see that part. We can play a part in that. Now, Yahweh's chosen, his last days house, will preach the message of Yahweh's kingdom, these laws and these prophecies, right through this greatest time of trouble. It's the greatest time of trouble that mankind has ever faced. But throughout it all, we will continue to preach the message of Yahweh all the way through it, because there's always going to be hope for people who will hear this message. If Yahweh will call them and open their minds, then they will be able to come and see these things. Matthew 24, verse 21 and 22 says, and then there will be great tribulation such as never come to pass since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever will be. There's never been a time, and there's been some horrible times. I mean, you think of the world wars, you know, of all the horrors. When you look at documentaries and you see the horrors that took place in history, and you think about the Crusades, you know, when they were going through and you read about the writings of them where there were actually rivers of blood. You know, they go into like Jerusalem and different cities like this, and there was blood up to the ankles and beyond, where the soldiers were just completely covered with blood. And they were swinging those swords and just going and wiping out, killing everybody, wiping out, and the bodies were stacked up. But they didn't move them, they just left them there. And then they all decayed, of course, and this was brought on the plagues. And from those plagues, it began to destroy their armies, and when it destroyed their armies, then they ended up suffering. But you think about the horrors that you read about in the Crusades. It's just astounding that that's nothing. Because mankind has never had, Yeshua, remember he told us, he says, the way that we know that we're living in the last days is that mankind would be able to wipe himself out. Well, mankind couldn't wipe himself out with armies, with swords, because there can always be a great army that comes in. But swords is not enough to kill every person on earth. But what we have nowadays is enough to kill everybody on earth. Way more. Remember, it used to be decades ago, they used to say that we could destroy the earth 10 times over, you know, with all the nuclear weapons we have. Who knows how many times that has taken place, because then we were talking about, you know, kilotons. Okay, now we're talking about hundreds of megatons, you know. It's crazy, man. Now these chosen ones, as he says, in Isaiah 24, where Yahweh says the earth is going to be empty, made worse, because the inhabitants will be scattered abroad and will be with the people, so with the priest, with the servant, the owner, the maid, the servant, and so forth, the buyer and the seller, commerce, financing, all of this stuff, everything that you can think of, banking industry, all these things are taken care of. Everything that mankind uses today that makes the world go round is going to be affected by this. And then the land will be utterly emptied, as it says, and utterly plundered. Okay? And this plundering is going to take place not so much from the wars and stuff, but mankind the earth will be plundered for the fact that it won't be able to support mankind. Mankind will begin to die off because they brought this upon themselves. And the earth will mourn and fade away. The earth itself is mourning. It's in pain. It's mourning. It even makes a mourning sound. It has this groaning-like sounding that they've recorded in outer space too. But the earth mourns and fades away, notice, and the world mourns and fades away. Okay, the world, the people, this whole system, people are mourning, and they will fade away, and the hardy people will languish, because they're going to see, remember like we talked about in Revelations 18, where the merchants will mourn and weep, because who's going to buy our merchandise? They're going to see this system collapsing. And the earth also is defiled under the inhabitants of it. The earth is defiled under the inhabitants of it, meaning the earth is defiled because of the inhabitants that own it, that inhabit it, but also, notice, it's defiled under the inhabitants. That word under also means underneath the feet of the inhabitants. The earth underneath the feet of the inhabitants itself is defiled. And they have transgressed the ordinance, the laws, notice, and changed the ordinance and broken the everlasting covenant. They changed the ordinance because there's order in everything that takes place. And when this mutation comes from all of these sins that Yahweh says don't do, because the people before you did these things and the land became abominable as they continued to do it, then that began to change these ordinances of these microbes of what they were supposed to be doing. Because remember, the laws of Yahweh were from the very beginning. They were set up. Once those laws were broken and began to mutate those laws and change those laws, now it no longer had the proper order to follow. And that is why the defilement takes place. Of course, it's been a slow process, because if Yahweh allowed it to take place too quickly, it would wipe us out, and we wouldn't be able to stand it. But it says they've broken the everlasting covenant. Because of this, the everlasting covenant. Yahweh says, I made a covenant with the children of Israel. It says, and if the sun could stop shining on the earth, and if the earth could stop revolving and so forth, and day and night would cease, then would my people cease from being a nation before me, he says. So everything is set up into motion. Remember, when you talk about the Israelites, okay, the children of Israel, those who rule as Yahweh rules. Okay? That's the ones that he's working with. And because of this, notice, the curse has devoured the earth, and they who dwell therein are desolate. Therefore, the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. That's the point that it's going to get to. It's going to get to where it's going to drive their minds to insanity, to where they're actually going to have this nuclear war. And that's going to be the very last war that will be fought. Is nuclear war, because no one's going to survive through it. In fact, we ain't got time. But the chosen of Yahweh have nothing to do, of course, with the rebellion of the gods of Christianity. Which, they preach that the laws of the kingdom of Yahweh have all been done away with. You don't have to keep any of these things. And of course, when you do that, if you do away with the only laws that can bring peace and life, you're not going to have peace and you're not going to have life. Everything will be destroyed. But Matthew 24, verse 29, immediately after the tribulation, in those days will the sun be darkened, and the moon will not give her light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. It's going to shake. As it says, the stars will fall from heaven. All of these things are going to be taking place when we see that. Think about it. The earth will reel to and fro like a drunkard, it says, and sway like a hut. That takes a tremendous amount of power. to be able to move the earth and to shake it like that, to move it out of its orbit in that sense. It's not going to move enough to where it's going to, destroy everything. But it's got to get to a point to where mankind will truly learn a lesson. And that's why we're afflicted in these last days so much, because we've got to learn that lesson. Now he says, at this very frightening time, all hope of life is gone, except for the hope of Almighty Yahweh. His prophecies state that he will save us if we remain faithful and true to his way. Faithful and true to his way. I really want to get into this, but I can't. The next section here is why the greatest tribulation and the next Holocaust were about how the sun would be darkened and the moon would not give her light. And this next section here is going to go in and show you proof of exactly what Matthew 24 is talking about here when Yeshua said that the sun would no longer give his light. Okay, and you got to remember that these studies and stuff were done in 1983, and it talks about how that with less than 1/2 of the arsenal, nuclear arsenal, it would cause the sun's light to be gone, and this would, and not return for as long as a year or more, but this was back in 1983, so this was like 30 years ago that these studies were done. And it even says about we cannot exclude the possibility of the extinction of the human species. And this has been, over the decades. It says, quote, over the decades that follow, we cannot exclude the possibility of the extinction of the human species. And over the decades, it's been 3 decades since these studies were done. And these were what they had then, like I said, kiloton weapons. Now we're talking about megatons, So we're going to have to stop here on we'll stop on top of page 266. But, our only hope is going to be in Yahweh. And that's why it says you've got to endure unto the end. You can't let anything sway you. This is the house of Yahweh. Okay, if you notice that Yahweh didn't say, I will build a house of Yahweh. I mean, we are a house of Yahweh out of the many that have been already, okay, the other 6 areas, but we are the house of Yahweh. There's only one house of Yahweh. There's only one whom Yahweh has sent. And we've got to keep that in our minds, and if we do, we cannot go wrong, because Yeshua said, believe all that the prophets have spoken, and all this is prophecy. You should be able to prove that to anyone. All the things that we know of, you should be able to prove these things in the scriptures and show someone of the hope that lies within you. Whether they believe you or not, that's a totally different story. But you should be able to prove it to yourself that this is the house of Yahweh. And if you're not in 100% in agreement, you're not going to make it. Because remember, that's what Yahweh says. We've got to be in unity. So work at it. Work hard at it. We've all got to accomplish this goal of making into that great kingdom. Because Yahweh, He's already promised it. He's already said it's ours. He's just waiting to give it to us. But we've got to prove ourselves worthy. Amen. If you go ahead and please stand, we'll go ahead and have closing prayer. Almighty Heavenly Father Yahweh, this is Kohen Michael Hawkins, asking to come before you, seed of your last day's witness, Yisrayl Hawkins, and through your Son, Yeshua Messiah, the High Priest of your great house, Father. We thank you for your great blessings of being able to rehearse these words of our beloved pastor and overseer, Yisrayl Hawkins, Father. We stand in amazement, Father, of the great and tremendous wisdom that he has as he knows your word, Father, as you inspire him and guide him through your Son, Yeshua, the great High Priest of your house, Father. It's so amazing that in these last days we do have a High Priest, Father, and we know that all these things are in accordance with prophecy, Father. There's never been another era of your house that has had a high priest, Father, but we do. So we know that when Yeshua had to die and suffer, Father, and that he was given the promise of becoming the high priest, he himself looked forward to these last days when your house would be established and that he could be the high priest over us, Father. And we thank you and we praise you for that great and awesome blessing. And we thank you for the promises that you've given to us. We ask and pray you continue to help us remain strong. Give health and healing to your people, Father, and give strength to our minds that we may continue to remain strong, Father, and do those things that are pleasing to you, and bring honor and glory to your holy and righteous name. But we do ask these things in unity with the body of priests through your servant Israel and through your beloved Son, Yeshua Messiah. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh.